There's a specific kind of person who makes distraction look easy to resist, not because they have more willpower, not because their work is more interesting, not because they have found the right productivity system or the right app or the right morning routine. They seem to focus effortlessly, like the work simply absorbs them, like the resistance that stops everyone else does not exist for them. And if you ask them how they do it, most of them say something that is not very helpful. I just start, and then I'm in it. A software engineer in Kyoto described this to a colleague who had been struggling with focus for years. The colleague had tried everything: time blocking, the Pomodoro technique, cold showers, white noise, phone in another room. Some things helped briefly. Nothing lasted. The focus always felt like fighting. The engineer looked at him for a moment and said, "You are trying to focus. That is the problem." In Japan, there's a concept from Zen martial arts that describes what the engineer had and what the colleague was missing. It is called Mushin, literally, no mind. The state in which action happens without the interference of self-conscious thought, where the archer releases the arrow without deciding to release it, where the swordsman responds before thinking about responding, where the work simply flows, not because effort has been removed, but because the resistance between the person and the work has been. Mushin is not a talent. It is not a personality type. It is a trainable neural state. And the neuroscience of how it works explains why everything most people try to improve their focus is working against them. 1. What Mushin actually is, and what the brain is doing. The word Mushin is often translated as empty mind, which sounds like the absence of thought. That is not quite right. Mushin is better understood as a mind not attached to thought, a mind in which thoughts arise and pass, without generating the self-commentary that interrupts action. The archer has thoughts, but none of them are about whether he is holding the bow correctly, whether he will hit the target, whether he is focusing hard enough. Those thoughts arise and pass without catching, and in their absence, the action that remains is clean. The neuroscience of this connects to what researchers call the default mode network, the brain system active during self-referential thinking, mind-wandering, and the internal monologue that most people experience as their default mental state. Research shows that when the default mode network is highly active during a task, performance suffers. The person is partially engaged with the work and partially engaged with thoughts about the work, monitoring their own performance, anticipating outcomes, judging the quality of their focus. The state of flow, described by psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi as the condition of complete absorption in a challenging activity, is neurologically characterized by reduced default mode network activity. The self-monitoring quiets. The internal commentary pauses. What remains is the action itself, unobstructed. Mushin is what Japanese martial arts have been training for centuries. Flow is what Western psychology has been measuring for decades. They are describing the same neural state from different directions. And the most important finding from both traditions is the same. You cannot force your way into it. The trying is what prevents it. 2. Why trying to focus is the enemy of focus. The colleague in Kyoto was not unfocused because he lacked discipline. He was unfocused because he was doing something that reliably produces the opposite of focus, monitoring himself trying to focus. Every time the mind wandered to a notification, a worry, a tangential thought, he noticed the wandering and generated a response to it, a judgment, an attempt to return, an evaluation of how badly he was doing. Each response was itself a thought that competed with the work. The focus effort was producing more noise, not less. Research on what psychologists call ironic process theory, documented by Harvard psychologist Daniel Wegner, shows that the deliberate attempt to suppress a thought reliably increases its frequency. The instruction, "do not think about the white bear," makes the white bear appear immediately and persistently. The instruction, "focus harder," generates a meta layer of thought about focusing that competes with the focus itself. This is why willpower-based approaches to focus consistently fail over time. They require the person to maintain a continuous self-monitoring process. Am I focused? Am I still focused? Am I focusing hard enough? That is itself the source of the distraction. Mushin sidesteps this entirely, not by trying not to think, but by changing the relationship with thought so that thoughts no longer require a response. They arise, they pass, the action continues. The engineer in Kyoto described his experience of starting work as entering a room rather than fighting through a door. He did not overcome resistance. The resistance was not there, not because he had eliminated distraction, because he had eliminated his relationship with distraction as something that required managing. 3. Zazen, the practice that trains Mushin. The primary training ground for Mushin in Japanese tradition is Zazen, seated meditation in the Zen tradition, but Zazen is frequently misunderstood in the West. Most people approach meditation as a concentration practice, an attempt to hold the mind still, to prevent thoughts from arising, to achieve a state of mental blankness. This approach produces frustration because thoughts cannot be prevented, and the attempt to prevent them generates exactly the self-monitoring that Zazen is designed to dissolve. Zazen is not concentration, it is observation. The instruction is not to prevent thoughts, but to notice them arising and passing without following them, to be the sky rather than the cloud, to observe the thought without becoming it. Each time the mind gets caught in a thought, follows it, becomes interested in it, responds to it, and then returns to simple observation, something is being trained, not concentration, the capacity to notice thought without attachment, the neural pathway that allows a thought to arise and pass without, triggering the cascade of self-commentary that constitutes most people's mental life during work. Research on mindfulness meditation and default mode network activity shows that consistent practice produces measurable reductions in default mode network activation during tasks. Not the elimination of thought, the reduction of self-referential processing. The internal monologue quiets. The gap between stimulus and response widens. The space in which action can happen without interruption grows. The colleague began sitting for 10 minutes each morning, not trying to clear his mind, watching what arose and letting it pass. The first weeks felt like failure, thoughts everywhere, mind constantly caught and returning. He did not know that the catching and returning was the practice, that each return was a repetition of the neural pattern that over months would become Mushin. Try this. Sit still for 5 minutes today. When a thought arises, notice it. Label it briefly, thinking, or planning, or worrying. and return to simple awareness of breathing, not to achieve anything, to practice the return. That return, repeated enough times, is what changes the brain's relationship with distraction. 4. Shuhari, the 3 stages of effortless mastery. Japanese martial arts have a framework for understanding how mastery develops that applies directly to focus. It is called Shuhari, 3 stages through which skill moves from conscious effort to effortless action. Shu, follow the rules completely. In the first stage, every movement is deliberate and self-conscious. The beginner thinks about each step, checks each action against the instruction, monitors their own performance continuously. The focus is on the form, not the function. This stage is slow, effortful, and feels nothing like Mushin. Ha! Break from the rules thoughtfully. In the second stage, the form has been internalized enough that attention can move from the mechanics to the application. The martial artist stops thinking about where the feet go and begins thinking about the opponent. The writer stops thinking about grammar and begins thinking about the idea. The rule following becomes background process rather than foreground attention. Transcend the rules. In the third stage, the form has become the body. Action arises without deliberation. The master does not decide how to respond. The response happens, arising from a depth of internalized practice that bypasses conscious processing entirely. This is Mushin, not the absence of skill so deeply embodied that it no longer requires thought to execute. The insight this framework offers for focus is specific. The effortless focus that the engineer in Kyoto demonstrated was not a state he had found. It was a state he had built through years of deliberate practice at the Shu stage, through the Ha stage of applying that practice to increasingly complex work, until the capacity for sustained attention had become, for him, as automatic as breathing. Most people want to skip to Ri. They want the effortless focus before doing the deliberate practice that produces it. Mushin cannot be accessed directly. It can only be earned through the stages that precede it. Try this. Identify one type of work you want to do with deeper focus. Then ask, am I at the Shu stage, still learning the form, or the Ha stage, applying internalized skill? The honest answer tells you what kind of practice will move you toward Mushin. If you are at Shu, more time with the fundamentals. If you are at Ha, more repetition until the skill runs itself. 5. The ritual entry. How to signal Mushin to the brain. There's one practical technique that both Japanese martial tradition and modern neuroscience agree produces faster access to the focused state, and most people never use it. A consistent pre-work ritual. In martial arts, every practice session begins with a specific sequence of preparation. The bow, the breath, the particular way of entering the training space. These are not ceremony. They are neural priming. The brain learns through consistent repetition that this specific sequence of actions predicts a specific state, and over time, the sequence begins to produce the state automatically, before the work has even begun. Research on what behavioral scientists call implementation intentions, the if-then structure of habitual behavior, shows that actions consistently preceded by specific cue become automatic responses to that cue. The cue triggers the behavior without deliberate decision. Applied to focused work, a consistent pre-work ritual becomes a trigger for the neural conditions that support deep focus. Reduced default mode activity, narrowed attentional field, diminished self-monitoring. The engineer in Kyoto had a ritual he'd been practicing for 11 years without consciously designing it. Before beginning any serious work, he made tea, not quickly, slowly, with full attention, from the same steps in the same order. By the time the tea was ready, he was already in a different state. The ritual had become the doorway. The colleague started building his own. 3 minutes of Zazen, a specific playlist that began playing only during deep work. The same physical arrangement of his desk. These were arbitrary in themselves. What mattered was the consistency. The brain learning that this specific sequence meant, now we focus. Within 6 weeks, he described sitting down to work differently, not with the familiar resistance, with something closer to anticipation. The ritual had begun doing what 11 years of martial arts training had done for the engineer, creating a pathway to the state rather than a battle to reach it. Try this. Design a 3-step pre-work ritual. It can be anything: a specific tea, a specific breath sequence, a specific arrangement of your space. Do it every time before deep work, without exception, for 30 days. Notice when the ritual begins to feel like a doorway rather than a delay. 5 things that people who focus effortlessly all have in common. They understand what Mushin actually is. Not empty mind, but a mind not attached to its own thoughts. A neural state in which action happens without the interference of self-monitoring. They have stopped trying to focus because they understand that the trying is the enemy of the thing they are trying to produce. They have trained through Zazen or its equivalent, not to achieve blankness, but to practice the return. Each return building the neural pathway that eventually becomes the state. They have moved through Shuhari, doing the deliberate work at each stage until skill becomes embodied and focus becomes automatic. And they have built a ritual entry, a consistent sequence that signals the brain to shift into the state rather than fight its way there. The colleague in Kyoto still struggles sometimes. The mind still wanders. The thoughts still arise. What has changed is his relationship with them. They no longer require management. They arise, they pass, and the work continues. He described it once as the difference between swimming against the current and learning that the current was never real. Japan calls that Mushin. The rest of the world is still trying harder. If this resonated, subscribe. We explore the psychology of how you think, feel, and live every week.